This is The Right Approach. I'm J.W. Judge, and with me is my co-host, Barbara Hinsky. This is a podcast for writers to learn more about the craft and business of writing as we explore a new topic every week. With us today is our guest, Erin P.T. Canning, who is a book editor, fiction author, and the host of the Parents Who Write podcast. After she donated 6 years of her life to motherhood, her identity now extends beyond chauffeur and tickle monster to include word generator and comma placer. She is the author of the fantasy romance novel Ruins and Redemption and earned her MA in writing from Johns Hopkins University. Erin, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's nice being on the other side of this.
Yeah, I've always felt the same way. I guess I'm 3.5 years into podcasting now, and it's always nice to when I get to be on the other side and don't have to drive or co-drive the bus and just get to answer questions instead.
Yes, I completely understand that.
All right, so you're here to talk with us about ways that we can strengthen our sentences. And since this will air on Halloween, but since writing can be spooky and scary enough on its own, I don't think we have to, add any unnecessary spooky season flavor in it.
Yeah.
All right, so I know you have several tips. And I know as soon as you pitched this idea to us, Barb and I were both like, oh, yes, strengthening individual sentences, because we focused a lot in the last few months on story theory in a practical sense. And so drilling down, although I don't really like that term, I don't even know why I just used it, but whatever. Talking very specifically about how to improve our sentences is something that we're excited about. So start us off wherever you want, and we'll go from there.
Okay. So the first thing that I really like to emphasize is to, like you said, editing can be scary. Revisions can be scary and overwhelming. And so I like to reiterate that I would say save this for the revision process and not when you are working on getting out that first draft, because we don't want perfectionism to hold us back from finishing that first draft. So please take all of this as something that is great for the revision process.
Yeah, I remember being told you can always edit what you've written, but you can never edit what you don't get down on the page. So don't let your editor brain interfere with your writer brain.
Exactly. Yeah. Let your creativity out, and then your judge can come back in during the revision process. And that's where we can focus on these tips that I have for you. So the first one is super easy. And the thing that I love about all of these is that they are relatively easy, but they're powerful, especially when you put them together. So the first one is just getting rid of those filler words. And those filler words are really, very, totally, basically, apparently, definitely, completely, practically. A lot of those words are filler words. And as writers, we tend to like them because we feel like they're adding emphasis to our sentences. But what they're really doing, look, I just said really because we talk that way, but what they're doing is making us sound a bit more hesitant because we're delaying getting to the point. And they just clutter our sentences and bog them down. And a lot of times, if you feel like you have to say really, what that tends to indicate is that you need a stronger verb. And so if you can just get rid of those filler words, and then if you have to say, I really need to go to the concert, consider instead it's desperate, or I'm desperate to go to the concert. And desperate is just so much stronger than really need, right? And plus now we've gone down to one word instead of two. And so we're also cutting down some of those extra words, right?
Yeah. And so, a lot of people read On Writing by Stephen King, where he, abhors adverbs. And I think that people get carried away with that. And it's not necessarily that anything is particularly wrong with adverbs. They're a part of speech. They are essential. They have a function. But a lot of times, and I know this is true for me, the adverb is there when a stronger word could be used in its stead.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I will say that I never want these to become across as hard, fast rules, right? It definitely helps when you cut them out, especially if you do a find and search in your document and you start seeing like, how many times did I actually use really? How many times did I use definitely, or whatever your default one is? And you're like, oh, okay, I can get rid of at least 90% of these. But they're fun in dialogue. If you have a character who tends to default to, like my 5-year-old right now, he cracks me up where he's like, apparently we're going to go watch Pokemon now. And I love that that's part of his speech pattern. And so if you have one of those words that a character defaults to, it's a great way to make them stand out and sound a little more unique.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is one of the things I wanted to ask is there a difference with these kinds of words in dialogue versus in, prose or the narrative portion of the story?
Exactly. I'm glad that I wound up jumping
Yeah,
into that
good job.
anyway. So yes.
So
Another, yeah.
I was going to say, for me, the default word is just.
Yes.
Um,
Me
Barb, do you
too.
have something that you find 600 times?
Oh yeah, just.
Yeah.
Just is I'm always getting rid of just in the first draft, in the first edit. Yeah.
Me too. All three of us. It's
Yeah.
just so easy to put it in there.
And it adds, a certain kind of colloquial emphasis. But then if I use it on every other page, there is no emphasis left. And I remember reading, this is changing it a little bit. It's more about being word sensitive to words you're using a lot. A very famous fantasy author, and they used the words boiled leather in this tome of a book. I don't know how many times, and almost too many times to count. And I thought that if I have to read those words together again, I'm just going to chuck the thing out the window. And so along the same line of being mindful of the words you use, and they may have a place, it's just they may have fewer places than what you put in that first draft.
Yes, most definitely. I agree. So here's another one actually that I get really excited about as an editor. And I love when I share this with my clients and I can see the light bulb go off and they get really excited too. And this one's renaming your it. I'm very big on renaming the now, or I'm very big on renaming the it. And again, I say sometimes you just need an it. That's fine. Like it's not that the it is the worst thing in the world. But the trouble with it is that you're requiring your reader to do the work. They have to figure out what the it is. And it can also lead to grammatical issues where if I said, my boyfriend gave me a present and wrapped it in a blue package with a gaudy silver bow on top, I hated it. Me as a writer, I might think the it is referring to the present at the beginning of the sentence, but grammatically speaking, the it refers to the bow. So it's can create a lot lot of confusion. And
to be fair, there's some really offensive bows that people put on things.
Yes, that's true, right? So there's two easy ways to get rid of your its. And the first one is, of course, open up your thesaurus and pick a synonym and you're good to go. But where I like to get really creative with my its is that's where you pull in your metaphors, your similes, your symbolism, right? And so how does the sentence change if you instead refer to it as a last minute apology or you know what? I can't remember what the other one is. I always have two that I think of. But it's like either a last minute apology or a token of his appreciation that completely changes the context of the sentence. So I think its are an underrated way that we can get more creative with our descriptions.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That's great.
I'm
writing these down, by the way.
I can tell Barb was taking like diligent notes over there.
I'm taking notes. Yeah.
I'm honored. I love passing this stuff on. Like I've been an editor for 15 years now. And so I've seen patterns throughout all of the documents that I have worked at, the thousands or millions of words that I have edited over time. And so these are the ones that definitely jump out at me at the most. So I'm glad to pass it forward. Another one. Okay, I get excited about all of these, so I'm sorry. But another one is empty words. If I say to you, there are, do you have a concrete image in your head?
Yeah.
No, right? Like there are so words like these, they're actually called expletives, but I just call them empty words. That's easier. They're not adding anything to your sentence. They're not adding context. They're just filling up space on your page. And a lot of times that's an easy fix where if you just delete the there and you're left with the were and you just move it somewhere else in your sentence, you already have something stronger. Like instead of there was a table and 4 chairs in the center of the room, you could then say a table and 4 chairs were in the center of the room. You've gotten rid of the there. And then if you want to go another step further, you can still look for a more engaging verb. So you could then be like, all right, what else could I do with this sentence? All right, 4 chairs surrounded a table in the center of the room. But if you just focus on that, there were, there is, there was, there are, look for those. Those are really easy ways to strengthen those sentences too.
Okay. So I rely pretty heavily, well, I do several rounds of editing. And so, after I finish, a lot of times I will kind of edit lightly as I go, especially if I have a part where I'm stuck at, I'll go back in the previous chapter and just do some editing to keep working on it. And then then my first like really intensive edit is when I'm done with the manuscript, I'll print it off and do it all with a red pen, just like when I used to be a high school teacher and bleed over everything. And then putting it in is a different round of editing because it still changes as the changes are going back in, they're changing too. After all of that step is done, I use Pro Writing Aid to go through chapter by chapter, line by line. But one of the things I wanted to point out is it doesn't catch and attend to some of these things that you're talking about. And so as helpful and important as a tool as that is, we still have to use some executive function to go in and search for and find the things that you're talking about, because at least so far, Pro Writing Aid, the other tools like that, they're really effective for what they do, but they can't and don't do everything.
That is true. You spoke to my heart there. I also have Pro Writing Aid because especially when I'm editing my own work, editors should never edit their own work. Our brains fill in the details.
Sure.
And so we skip over things. And I appreciate Pro Writing Aid for catching some things like you said. But even as an editor, there's times where I get frustrated with the recommendations that Pro Writing Aid is making.
Yes.
And I'm like, no, that's not right. Like you should not put a comma in between when you have a parallel structure of not only, but also. And every time it wants to put the comma in there, and I'm like, no, that's a parallel structure. Stop it. That does not go in there. And
yeah,
so
there's things that I categorically just refuse to change because they work. So you've got to use your discretion there.
Yes.
There is a really good example of this because there's nothing objectively wrong with it. There is just a better and more useful and I was going to say emphatic. I feel like I've used that word a lot here on this, but way to do it. All right. What do we got now? What's next for us?
Okay. You got it. And I just want to say, I do enjoy using Pro Writing Aid. So please know that. But okay. Okay.
Yeah,
so
Pro Writing Aid, if y'all want to pay us to do this, like we're here.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So here's my next one. This is having fun with zombies. I need it to be something memorable because we always hear about active voice versus passive voice. And when we get into the nitty gritty of grammar, that can be very overwhelming. So to just simplify this, the easiest way that you can figure out if you're using if you're using passive voice is if immediately after the verb, you can add by zombies. So the school was struck by zombies. She was attacked by zombies. she was seduced by zombies, whatever it's going to be. If you can add that immediately afterwards, you know that you're using passive voice. And then all you want to do is just take by zombies, really, those zombies, and move them to the front of your sentence. And please, of course, then swap them out with whatever the actual thing is. So instead of the school was struck by lightning, it becomes lightning struck the school. Or instead of she was seduced by him, it becomes he seduced her. Or hey, maybe in this case it is zombie seduced her. You don't know. I'm not judging. But if you work with those zombies, they can help you to more easily identify passive voice.
Okay. I'm going to state my understanding about passive voice, and then I have a question to follow it up with.
Okay.
My understanding is that with passive voice, the problem, to the extent that's the right word, is that the person or thing is receiving the action rather than performing or doing the action. So it is something that is happening to them rather than that they are doing. Is that a fair characterization?
Absolutely.
Okay. There are times when I have something that is happening to my protagonist and that I want to demonstrate through the use of passive voice. And you can tell, I guess my question is this a good or bad use of it? That this thing is occurring to them, that they are powerless in this situation, that they are a victim, whatever, the particulars happen to be. And it's an intentional decision to use it that way so that the sentence structure demonstrates the same idea as the events that are occurring. Is that a good use of passive voice, or is there still a better way to go about it? And I know that's really general without any kind of specific example to follow it.
No, it's okay. I love that you brought that up because I talk about this. So one thing, I love that you said you use it intentionally. And that is the key with understanding grammar in the first place, is that when you understand the correct, air quote, way to use grammar, you can then intentionally decide to break it. That being said, part of the cons with passive voice, like you said, is that instead of our characters taking action, things are happening to them. And if you have an entire paragraph where stuff is just happening, passive voice can be very boring and put your readers to sleep. So I would say, please try not to have paragraph or chapters written in passive voice, because that is what happens. But you can intentionally decide to break that. That being said, again, there is a way around it. For example, I remember working with somebody about this, and they were trying to describe a door closing. They were like, the door was closed as she walked in. And here's the other trick with passive voice, is that you're hiding who's doing the action, and then it makes your readers stop and go, wait, the door was closed behind her, so who closed the door? And that can pull your reader out of the story if they're too confused by it. So a lot of times instead you could think, well, I don't want to give away what closed the door, so how else can I do this? The wind closed the door behind her, or maybe the door slammed shut behind her. And so now you're like, okay, it slammed shut. We're not using passive voice. We're just saying that the door slammed shut behind her. And, she turned and looked to see who did that, but didn't see anybody. So as long as you're still concrete in your details, you can get around it. But just keep in mind that you're burying the lead if you use passive voice. And sometimes you want to, but you want to make sure that people still understand what's happening and they're not going, wait, what? How is that even possible? Does that make sense?
Oh, for sure. I'm just sitting over here knowing that Barb just finished reading my 5th novel, and so she may have a better idea of whether any of that stuff was effective or not. But Barb, I jumped in on you there.
Oh, I think it was effective, and I think it's really hard. You can make that one passive voice sentence almost be a little bit of a cliffhanger. You can create suspense with it, but it is hard to do because you don't want to bore or confuse the reader. So you just have to craft that sentence very carefully and limit it to just one.
Which comes back to that being intentional with it.
Yeah, it's hard to do.
Yes. Yes, it is. Yeah. But that's really cool though. Number 5, I'm like,
we're gonna do it. We're gonna get through all 7 here.
Yes. Okay. So here we go. Number 5. I'm scrolling through them to make sure I don't miss any. Oh, I get excited over all of these. I'm such a geek. That's okay. I like being a word nerd. Um, so, okay, another easy one. Do a search in your manuscript for these, but these are telling verbs. This is where you use, she thought, he recognized, they realized, he saw, felt, noticed, heard, found, knew. Those words, those are telling verbs, and they're telling us what the character is experiencing. And so part of the problem with those verbs is that they take us out of the moving picture inside our head, right? That's the downside of telling, is that rather than us getting to experience it with the character, we're now just being told what they're feeling. So a lot of times when you've got those words, if you force yourself to delete, he noticed a black cat running across the lawn. Instead, you can just say, a black cat ran across the lawn. You don't have to tell us he noticed it because we're already in his perspective, depending on what POV you're using here. But you can just say, a cat ran across the lawn. She realized it was windy outside. Instead, just tell us she stepped outside and the wind whipped her hair backwards, and those kinds of things. He recognized he was being an idiot. That one, this is the one I loved this one, and I thought about this. He recognized he was being an idiot. Well, maybe instead he's like, I knew, or like, okay, so some of these are harder if I'm like going really off the cusp, whatever. He recognized he was being an idiot. Instead of that one, I would say, I should have done XYZ, and instead I did this, and now I'm going to have to deal with the repercussions. And if you walk us through that, we can tell that he's being an idiot without you saying he recognized he was being an idiot.
Or I was thinking too that along these lines of that particularly, or the he thought or she thought, you can use that interior dialogue, and for me that's something I always put in italics when I have their direct thoughts. But a lot of mine, when I'm writing close third or first, well, those are so different. It bleeds into, it's their perspective anyway, and so and then I now forgot my example that correlated with what you were saying, but if you're close first or a close, well, I guess close first is obvious, but if you're first or a close third, you can say, I should have done X, but I did Y anyway, and whatever. Like, yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
That's a good example.
Yeah. I'm glad you guys are loving all of these. Yeah. I also use internal monologue. My story, Runes and Redemption, is third person close. It's also present tense. I wanted to play around with present tense, and I had a lot of fun with that. And yeah, whenever she goes deep into her thoughts, like words that your characters can picture inside their head, that's when I just use the italics at that point. Yeah, further.
Oh, that's tell me about that. That's sometimes I struggle with, what do I just want to say as part of the prose versus when do I want this directly to be pulled out of their thoughts and put it down that way. So go a little further on what you just said.
Okay, sure. It's when, like I said, if your character, okay, do you talk to yourself in your head? I do.
Yes.
Okay. I talk to myself in my head. And when I'm talking to myself in my head, if I can hear those words actually being said inside my head, that's when I would italicize them for my character. If they're just going deep into thoughts, but they aren't actually talking to themselves inside their head, then I don't italicize. I'm just diving deep into their psyche.
Yeah. And I didn't know until recently that not everybody has that internal talking. And it blew my mind when I knew that people don't. And I haven't been able to stop wondering, like, what is it, just quiet? Because that would be nice. It would be really nice to just have some quiet. But I just wonder what that's like, and I can't imagine it.
I can't imagine it either. My husband just told me about that like a couple weeks ago, and we both sat there staring at each other. I can't fathom that. Is it just a blur of feelings and emotions that I just, yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, so we're at number 6. And these are emotion words. I love using my highlighter tool. I had a client who came to me once and she said, my character is supposed to feel this way in the scene, but I feel like her emotions are bouncing all over the place and I can't pinpoint why. And I was like, okay, cool. So we went through her paragraph that she wanted us to review, and I had her highlight every time she did something or said something that conveyed an emotion. I'm getting a little sidetracked here. I'm sorry, but anyway. And so we used the highlighter tool and we associated a different color with a different emotion. And by the time we were done, she had this rainbow effect going on with her paragraph. And she was like, oh, I only wanted them to feel like, or I only wanted her to be oscillating back and forth between feeling vulnerable and angry. And so once we had that rainbow effect, it was very easy to go in and identify, okay, sounds more like she's laughing in this sense, or she's being sarcastic, and that's not one of the emotions that you want. So it was just an easy tweak of those words at that point. And then I just gave away a fun editing tip. That's totally not what I meant to go over here. I am talking about emotion words though, and still using that highlighter tool. Whenever you write in your sentence, especially first drafts, right? I do it all the time. She felt happy. She was sad. She was frustrated. He was angry. Whenever you use those words, highlight them. And then when you go back, you can think to yourself, okay, I have named the emotion. Now I want to force myself to delete it. And how can I show it instead? And so that one, you're just scanning through your document to see whenever you have named an emotion. Sorry for my segue there.
No, I think that's great. And I can give a really true to life example of this. I was helping coach my 9-year-old's baseball team yesterday, and one of the boys struck out and he came back to the dugout and he was mad and he was frustrated. And I could write that he was mad and frustrated, or I could write that he threw a water bottle against the wall and water went everywhere and it was a mess. And that demonstrates that emotion rather than, because like you said, saying that they were frustrated or angry, whatever, doesn't lend itself to that movie that's going on when you're reading. It's in the head. Whereas putting an action to the emotion makes it more demonstrative and allows that movie to keep playing.
Exactly. And we are most expressive as a species with our eyes, our nose, our mouth, and our hands. So if you want to delete, she felt love, or she loved him, or, anything along those lines, this is where you can stand in front of a mirror and use your acting skills and be like, okay, what does that feel like? What is she doing with her eyebrows, or how is her body movement? Or, if they're angry and you see of course, those furrowed brows, I have to go through and reduce the number of times that I say furrowed brows. But, nostrils flailing, or if you're pressing your lips into a thin line, or if you're frustrated but you don't know quite what to say, so you open your mouth to speak, but then no words come out. There's so many different ways that we can animate what we're doing rather than having to say he was frustrated. So, and throwing a water bottle, I love that. That's such a great visual of just.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Barb, when you are writing more subtle emotions, I mean, anger is fairly easy, but when you're writing things that are more subtle and fewer visual cues, do you have tools, any go-tos that you use? Are there parts of the body that you reference to demonstrate that? What do you kind of use to convey that?
That's interesting because my biggie is smiled. I have too many people smiling. I write happy stuff, just too darn much smiling. So I really use the emotion thesaurus.
Yes, mine is up behind me on the wall.
Mine is behind me too. Such a valuable resource to try and get other body parts. Your shoulders can, whether they're up like this, you're generally not happy if your shoulders are up at your ears, that kind of stuff. So I struggle with that. That's a constant struggle to really show happiness in other ways. And you can have people whistle, or generally you don't whistle if you're unhappy, or whatever. Frustration is another one. I have people raking their hands through their hair, just a zillion times. I struggle with it, but the emotional thesaurus is dog-eared for a good reason.
Mine too. And when I'm going through my first revision and I'm looking more at structural issues, timeline issues, plot holes, all that stuff, I don't want to get stuck in sentence level edits because I'll get lost in the weeds. So instead, if I see that I've named an emotion, I just highlight it and I'll be like, I will come back to you later.
Yeah. And then it's more productive. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then I pull out my copy of the emotional thesaurus and I'll look through that too. And then sometimes I'll also tap into my 7th one that I love.
Nice segue there.
Yes, well, thank you. Yeah, they actually go together really well. So number 7 is dealing with abstract words, things that are not concrete. So we can't actually picture them in our head. These are words that people can't perceive physically. So we're talking about personality traits, adjectives, ideas, and if we use these abstract words, we require our reader to have to use their imagination. So I'm talking about words like beauty and love, those kinds of ideas, right? Like they're just not concrete. And so the downside of using abstract words like that is if we are leaving it up to our reader to fill in that void, that visual, we're making them do the work again, but also we're not guiding them to see things our way, which is kind of what we're doing as writers, right? We want people to view the world through our character's perspective and, right, take a walk in somebody else's shoes. And so if we leave these abstract words, they jump back into their own shoes because they've got to fill in that void. So, and again, these are words like comfortable, patient, elegant, loyal, brave, compassionate, honorable, trusting, those kinds of words. So I do this fun exercise with my coaching clients where we make a chart, and I have one side where it's that general abstract word. And so, like, let's say it's beauty or beautiful, right? And then I have them each go around and name something to them that is beautiful. So, Jeremy, what to you is beautiful?
Well, I will say very seasonally here that the foliage in the trees.
There you go. I love that. What about for you, Barb? What do you consider beautiful? What pops into your head?
I was just thinking similar, the quality of light in October is just gorgeous.
Yeah. Where are you guys? Sorry, real quick.
I'm in Phoenix, Arizona.
Okay.
No, and I'm in Birmingham, Alabama. And I remember, Barb, you saying that about the light. Somebody who I won't be able to identify, it was probably somebody eloquent like William Faulkner, talked about the quality of light in the South. And I was thinking about this yesterday as we were driving back from baseball game under like a canopy of trees. It is just different with those, those warm colors that's surrounding everything because it's all reds and oranges and browns, and that the quality of the light is different in this time of year than in other time of the year. And I'm sure that it's, the angle of the sun in the southern sky and all that. But I was just thinking about that yesterday, and you saying that reminded me.
I love that. And it's also very poetic. But then what you can do is if you want to talk about beauty, you can still use that word, but you're going to wrap it around that concrete image. So XYZ was as beautiful as the slant of light in an October that illuminates the red and gold and burnt orange leaves of a maple tree.
So you're gonna rely on similes and metaphors here that depict the idea rather than just giving only the idea.
Exactly. And it's really fun where if you do have first you can force yourself to do this, right? Okay, what are things that I find beautiful, and make a list of it. And then this way, whenever you want to describe beauty in your book, you have something that you can go back to. But it's also really fun if you go around in a circle, if you have a writer's group or you do sprints or you talk to each other, you could take turns going through this. I did one where we talked about elegance. What do you think of, he was elegant. What is it that you think of as elegant? And somebody in my group had said perfectly pressed pants with the pleat straight down and the silver cuff appearing just underneath the jacket. And I was like, oh, that's so beautiful. That is elegant. And it's just fun putting together that collection of images that you can then go back to.
That's just great. That is gold. I love that.
Thank you. Those are my 7 tips on easy ways to strengthen your sentences.
Well,
that's just
yeah. So if people want more from you, want to know where to follow you, find you, keep up with the work that you do, where do they do that?
Parents Who Write. I would say if you're listening to this podcast right now, open up your phone and do a search for Parents Who Write. I'm on all podcasting platforms. And I have guests come on my show. You don't have to be a parent to listen to it, right? Like, these tips are not just for parents, but yes, we're Parents Who Write. And I just love talking to other writers and learning about their journey, what they've learned along the way. And then I also share my editing tips throughout as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We really enjoyed this conversation. It has so much to do. And I appreciate that.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
Probably.